Hello, everybody. It's Cody at Cody's Reading Time. I'm reading one of my own fairy tale stories today that I wrote. And if you want to find out how I wrote this story or how I outlined it, check out my How to Write a Fairy Tale video that's also posted on my channel for 5 key points that you need to write a fairy tale story. And please subscribe. I upload new stories every single day from different fairy tale books and some of my own. So let's get started on today's story, Long Live the Queen. Here we go. Before the days of you or I, and in a land far, far away, there was a most wonderful kingdom, and it's from this kingdom that our story begins. The king and queen had a daughter, a most fair girl, and as she grew, she became even more beautiful than they could have ever imagined was possible. The queen had named this child Cynthia, after the fairy that looked kindly upon them in their times of need, and it was clear that this kind fairy had bestowed many a wonderful gift upon their child. A grand feast was called for upon Cynthia's 16th birthday, and all of the most regal and important people from neighboring kingdoms, both near and far, were called to attend, as well as the good fairy, who took it upon herself to travel to this kingdom early, saying that she wished to assist the king and queen in their preparations for the feast. With one wave of her wand on the day of the party, the castle turned completely to gold, the tables and benches to silver. The goblets were filled with beautiful stones and pearls. There were beautiful tapestries hung on the walls, which were woven with such precision and skill that only the divine could have made it. The king and queen, and even the princess Cynthia, could not believe the richness by which this fairy enchanted their castle, and they thought it very well indeed. For who, thought the queen, would not choose to ask for my daughter's hand, after seeing the wealth and blessings that our kingdom very surely has? All of the guests arrived and thoroughly enjoyed the splendor to which they were entertained. They stuffed their pockets with precious stones freely given to them. They drank the sweetest wine and ate the most delicious meats and fruits and nuts. They were played the most delicate music by a band of enchanted animals. The lute player was a cat, the fiddler was a dog, and on the tambourine next to them played the rat. The king stood before everyone at the end of the night and proposed that the very next day he would begin taking proposals of marriage for his daughter Cynthia, the most beautiful princess, and they would someday be king of the most blessed kingdom in the world. Cynthia stood and curtsied to all of the visitors as she had been told to do following her father's speech. Her soft chestnut curls flowed over her shoulders to the front of her dress, and her dress shone like the stars. As she curtsied, there was a slight blush to her cheeks, and as she looked over the group of prospective husbands in the room, there were many oohs and ahs as she glanced at each one of them. The queen rose and stood next to her husband and Princess Cynthia to make the final toast of the evening. They all three held their glasses high to their guests, and they drank to the wealth of their kingdom and the blessings and virtues of Cynthia. Very suddenly, within the great hall, there was a crash, and the queen's goblet hit the ground. Suddenly, she fell to the ground with it. She was in a fit. The king quickly knelt to the ground and held her, but as suddenly as it had happened, it had ended, and the queen had died. All the guests in the palace were shocked and dismayed at the sight that they had beheld, but none more than the Princess Cynthia, who, after hearing "Long Live the Queen" from the crowd, fell into such a state of dismay that she was inconsolable. The tears freely flowed down her face, and she tore at the dress, feeling as though her heart was suffocating her. And for 3 days she ate little and drank little, and it was the common opinion of the best doctors sent to attend to her that she would surely die of this heartbreak. On the morning of the 4th day, a visitor, the fairy Cynthia, called on the princess. The fairy, not being barred by locked doors, simply floated through the window at the 3rd-floor room to which the princess had confined herself. "I bring you grave news, princess, for I know that your mother, the queen, had been poisoned. But alas, I do not know the name of your mother's poisoner, but I have come to tell you that her death was no accident. This was an orchestrated event." Hearing this, the princess was filled with a new desire, the desire to discover who had poisoned her mother, the queen. "The great fairy Cynthia, I thank you for coming to me with this information. I wish to find out the name of my mother's poisoner, and I will travel to the end of the world to discover it." Filled with this newfound passion, the princess prepared herself for her journey. She knew that she could not leave the castle walls as she was. She would be discovered and would be taken back to the castle for her safety. She needed a disguise. There was a girl that worked in the kitchen who had almost the same fair hair as her, although very different were the appearance of their faces. The princess thought to switch places with this girl, for being confined in her room all day under the greatest distress, visitors to her room would only see the girl from behind, and they would believe that she, the princess, was continuing to isolate and confine herself to her room and to her despair. She convinced this girl with a sum of money to go along with this ruse. They switched clothes in the upper room, and with the help of the great fairy Cynthia and a wave of her magic wand, a glamour gave them each other's visage. Now Princess Cynthia was the maid entirely. The next morning, the princess, as the kitchen maid, told the cook that she was going out to the hen coop to collect eggs for the king's breakfast, and around the coop she went and hid through the cover of trees that surrounded the palace greens. She had escaped. She decided at first to travel to the seashore. Perhaps the poisoner had gone there to seek out shelter in a cave. She followed the line of trees that had covered her until she reached the high road, a good distance away from the castle. No one would have guessed that this young lady was anything other than the kitchen maid that she pretended to be, and she walked along the high road with only a few exchanges of pleasantry to passer-bys. I don't know how long it took her to get to the seashore, but as she followed at the water's edge, on her way to the caves that marked the end of the beach, a glimmer, something caught her eye in the water, and as she gazed where she thought it had been, ripples appeared, and then a great whirlpool. The ocean crashed into the great whirlpool, and through the foam it appeared, a most majestic and giant seahorse. Its body glimmered with all the colors of the rainbow and shone with the brilliance of 1,000 stars. It floated above the water as if some sort of animal god. "What ails you, princess?" The princess was quite shocked at the rather sudden appearance of a giant and majestic talking seahorse suspended in the air, but she asked it, "Do you know the name of my mother's poisoner?" And the seahorse said, "I wish I could help you, but nay, I do not know the name of your mother's poisoner. But I can tell you that the answer is not to be found here. Perhaps you travel to the great mountains in the north, for there, at the top of the highest peak, lives the king of the snakes, and he is wiser than I. Perhaps he can tell you, but it is a long distance away." The princess thanked the seahorse, and it was gone just as suddenly as it had come, and only a gentle foam remained from whence the whirlpool had been. A beautiful blue sapphire washed ashore at her feet, and she decided to pick it up, for if not her, then someone else would, and perhaps the seahorse had left her something that she was intended to have. Placing the sapphire in the pocket of her apron, she continued on her way, reaching the high road. She took at the fork the north path, which led to the Snake King's palace, and for 3 days did she then travel across rough and hilly terrain to reach the top of the mountain, surviving only on small numbers of berries and nuts that she was able to find along the way, and she slept by the warmth of a fire under the open stars. Princess Cynthia was met at the palace gates, which were of the most beautiful silver, with gold spiraled around each of the silver posts, resembling snakes with jewels set for the eyes, by a sentry. The sentry at once stated to the princess that only those who have been chosen may be granted an audience with the great king of the snakes. Had she gone all of this way for nothing? Were the hardships that she had endured on the way there all for naught? She noticed then, at the centerpiece of the gate, which would have held the lock from the other side, 15 dazzling golden snakes, all with precious stones for eyes. One had rubies, another diamonds. There were emerald eyes looking at her, citrine and amethyst and sapphire. Or at least she thought to herself, one sapphire eye. She then at once felt elated. Could the sapphire that washed up on the beach at her feet be at once useful? She pulled out the sapphire from the apron pocket into which she had placed it, and set it into the open socket of the golden snake's eye, and at once the snakes became alive and began to uncoil themselves. The gate opened wide, and the sentry gazed with wonder at this kitchen maid that had somehow been chosen to have an audience with the great king of the snakes. "You must have divinity on your side," was all that he said as he led her to the great hall, which was just as elaborately and intricately designed and decorated as the outer gate. The king of the snakes sat on his golden throne, which was dripping with silver snakes with precious stone eyes. He looked at her and asked, "What ails you, princess?" holding the S as snakes often do. She shook at the sight of this 15-foot serpent, thinking that she must look like a small little mouse that's entered the wrong hole by accident and meets with its doom. She looked up with great courage and bravery straight into the king of the snakes' sparkling red eyes and asked him, "I've come to ask if you know the name of my mother's poisoner." And the king of the snakes looked upon her with a kind of softness and said, "I wish I could help you, but nay, I do not know the name of your mother's poisoner. I can tell you the answer is not to be found here. Perhaps you travel to the great forest of the west, for there, within a tree in the darkest part of the forest, lives a monkey who is a sage, and he is wiser than I. Perhaps he can tell you, but it is a long distance away." And the Snake King led her back to the gates where she would resume her great journey. She exited the gates and traveled a small distance, and there in the middle of the road lay a diamond sparkling in the sunlight. She thought that this too she should pick up, for if not useful, then at the very least she could make it into some ring or necklace when she returned to her kingdom. So the princess did then travel 3 more days over treacherous terrain to get to the deep forest, to meet with the sage monkey, eating only what vegetation she could find that she knew to be safe for eating. She came upon the edge of the great forest, and the farther she walked, the darker it became. She followed the scant rays of light that did peep through the dense canopy above. I do not know how long it took her to reach the sage monkey's treehouse, but when she did, she knocked at the door, and it was answered by the most curious, white-colored monkey she had ever seen. His eyes were clouded over with age, and he was stooped, and he held a walking stick made of a dense kind of wood found within this magical forest. "I have traveled long to see you, dear sage monkey. I hope you can help me. Do you know the name of my mother's poisoner?" And he said, "I do know the name of your mother's poisoner, but I cannot tell you, because it would cause you the greatest distress, and it may lead to your own death." Had the princess really come all this way to be turned away? She desperately tried to plead with the monkey to tell her who the name of the poisoner was, but he would not tell her. She made the second attempt by offering the monkey gold and silver, but the monkey only said he had no use for riches. Then she offered provisions fit for a king, and the monkey only stated that it fared quite well on the forest's offerings. "What can I give you that is an incentive to give me that information?" she entreated. "You must only announce the verdict in front of all the people of your kingdom. If you do not, then the poisoner will surely have you killed, because you place them at great risk of discovery if not all discover at once, and will behave as if a cornered animal defending himself." She promised that she would do so, and he told her if she traveled to the deep well in the third clearing of the woods that she came across, she would discover the answer, for the evidence of the poisoning was there, but she must promise to take care with the information and to protect herself, as she had promised to do. She walked along and reached the first clearing, which was full of birch trees. Then, farther along the second clearing, which was full of cedars. And at the third clearing she found the well, surrounded by ancient oaks. She reached down to pull up the bucket. The diamond from her apron slipped out and fell into the well. Suddenly, the well was so full of crystal clear and cool water that the bucket washed up and over the edge and rolled over to her feet. She picked up the bucket, and inside she found her father's cloak wrapped around an apothecary's toolbox, which led her to determine that her king the father had poisoned her mother the queen. Alas, my own father is the culprit of this most heinous crime. If only I had known his plans as to have been able to stop him before the event took place, I positively would not have allowed for the feast. He must pay for the early death of my mother. She happened to glance over at the well, which was continuing to flow fountains of crystal clear water over the edges, and something glittered there, just in the center of the water. A bottle? She walked over to it, and the most dazzling sight, a bottle made of the same sparkling fire of the diamond that she had lost. The bottle was full of water from the well. She tried to open the stopper, but it was held fast by some enchantment. She placed this bottle in her apron pocket and began on the journey home, which took her only 3 days, and was surprisingly easy-going when once her travels had been arduous. She entered the hall of the castle and called for a full audience, and the king scoffed at the nerve of this kitchen maid that would tell this great king what to do. You have no rights to call for an audience. But suddenly, all of the castle staff, the citizens of their kingdom and others, and the neighboring lords, princes, kings, and queens entered the great hall. There was such a number of people that the palace was full from this hall to the palace gates and still further back a long, long ways down the high road. The fairy Cynthia made her grand appearance through the ceiling and drifted down, and beside this kitchen maid, who was now no longer a kitchen maid, but Princess Cynthia, glamour removed, and she stood in front of all of the great people and more than she had stood before on her birthday night when they all toasted and the queen died. She told them all of her journey, of the escape she made, of the seahorse and the snake king, of the great sage monkey and the well, and when it came time she pulled out the cloak and the poisoner's box, pointing to her father. And here is the queen, my mother's poisoner. He should be locked up and tried for what he's done, yelled the crowd, and they pulled him away from the throne at which he stood before, and started to take him toward the dungeon. The great fairy Cynthia, having placed a spell on the queen's body so that it would never lose the beauty of life, had placed the glass-covered coffin in the great hall, where they were, and Princess Cynthia walked over to it, removing the lid. Holding out the diamond bottle, the fairy Cynthia flew to her. Waving her wand, the bottle opened by magic, and the waters from the well washed over the queen's body. These were the waters of life, a magic elixir that can bring back the dead, and the queen was revived and smiled upon her daughter. The king was tried for his crime and was beheaded, but the queen and the princess lived happily to the end of their days without him. And long live the queen. I hope you enjoyed that story, and please subscribe. I upload new stories every single day on my channel. There will always be something new to listen to. All right, take care, everybody. Bye-bye.